All right. Hey, folks, it's Rick Wilson here. Welcome to Friday's edition of Lunch with Lincoln. Glad you could join us today for a quick conversation, as we do every Monday and Friday on Lunch with Lincoln. We're going to talk to Kiera Hall today of the Commonwealth Forward organization, and they are helping do a lot of immediate work on the ground in Virginia. Actual grassroots contact and voter contact stuff in Virginia in what is the most hotly contested governor's race in the country. So Kiera, welcome. Thanks so much for being with us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Rick. And thank you for Lincoln Project for all the provocative conversations that you have every day, but especially on these lunchtime Friday conversations.
Thank you so much. So Kiera, tell us a little bit about Commonwealth Forward and what the mission is, and tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of work you guys are doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a new organization. We were founded just this year in 2021 with the mission of fighting the corrosive effects of the corporate influence on our political process here in Virginia. For folks who don't know, we have some of the most egregious campaign finance laws, or should I say lack thereof, here in Virginia. And that is the perfect breeding ground for a lot of corporate corruption within our political system and the ability for corporations to essentially buy elections and buy votes. And so our mission at Commonwealth Ford is to elect progressives, elect folks who are going to stand up to corporations, who are going to represent their constituents over special interests. And we do that by electing progressives who are going to stand up for racial, environmental, and economic justice, not just during the election season, but every day.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that Virginia is one of the states that has extraordinarily loose campaign finance restrictions, which in some ways, that is, you can almost clock the degree of corruption in the state by the degree to which the campaign finance structure allows for unlimited spend. And we've all had to face that, for good and bad in politics. But I mean, I've seen stuff in Virginia like bills getting ready to be passed, and in the dead of night, Dominion calls 20 members and says, "No, you don't," and they switch off legislation very quickly. In this case, what are you seeing in terms of the spending around Youngkin and the Republicans right now from some of the dark money that's out there?
Yeah, I think that you said it perfectly well. My personal belief is that there's kind of a happy medium between really restrictive campaign finance laws and what we have currently in Virginia, which is nothing. When you look at states that have really restrictive laws, there tends to be more dark money, as you mentioned, and folks tend to find loopholes. And so, in Virginia, for example, we're just asking for what I think is the bare minimum, right? Where a corporation isn't allowed to give, let's say, $1 million directly to a candidate. And we also have laws where candidates can, spend their campaign funds on a lot of things, right? So the pathway from corporation to elected official is pretty straightforward. I think, the dark money question is always interesting here in Virginia. Dark money traditionally refers to money that is not spent by the campaign or the candidate themselves, but is spent in support of the campaign by an outside group, right? So while we have a lot of dark money in Virginia every cycle, it's actually not required and it's not necessary. It would be very legal for any interest group to directly contribute to the campaign and their efforts. However, when you do see dark money, that usually means that we have an interest group that is not willing to necessarily put their face on an issue or a candidate, and they're trying to use these vehicles as a way to push their agenda without taking ownership of the initiative. And so, I think when you look at this gubernatorial, it's a perfect example. Terry McAuliffe has a pretty strong fundraising advantage. He's a great fundraiser. Everybody knows that. He's raised almost $14 million. And Youngkin isn't doing too bad either. He's up there as well, just trailing him by a little bit. But when you bring in dark money let's call dark money, right, into the equation with all of the other folks who are in the space advocating for each candidate, it's really tied neck and neck. There's a lot of spending in the space, and there's a lot to be spent on. I mean, we're in one of the most expensive media markets in the world, right?
Trust me, I know. I was pricing Northern Virginia the other day. It's gotten very spendy up there.
It has, right? And so about a third of the population, or just under a third, lives up here in the DC area. If you think about Washington, DC, right, we only have about 6,000 residents in in the borders of DC. But the DC metro is huge. And a lot of the Virginians that McAuliffe is going to be going after, for example, are residents of this greater DC area. That's about 3 million people, right? And so those are the folks that I think McAuliffe is going to spend a lot of money of his campaign trying to get those folks to turn out, to have a plan to vote, to know where to vote. And then also, I think the name of the game for Youngkin in this particular area is to keep folks at home potentially, right? To sort of suppress.
He needs to not get blown out in Northern Virginia.
He does. And the most recent poll I saw that McAuliffe has about a 2-to-1 advantage. So that's pretty strong here.
Yeah, I would be careful though, because Terry needs to keep Youngkin somewhere around 40, 41, 42%, just to make sure that there's no red surge out in the state that can overtake him. But I think that the 3 million people in those 6 counties in Northern Virginia, they went for Joe Biden by about 10 points. In some counties a little higher than that, but average around the 6 counties around 10 points. And I think that there's a sense that the more you tie Glenn Youngkin to Donald Trump, who is Trump's endorsed candidate, the better off you are in those counties. I just hope Terry's going to lean in on that message a little harder than I think they've been doing so far. This really is a referendum on, do you want a Trump candidate leading Virginia or anyone else?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think every actor in the state knows that that's kind of the name of the game at this point. I mean, you have Youngkin, who is, let's call him an insurrectionist sympathizer, right? He doesn't call for any sort of formal investigations or sanctions. And in terms of election integrity, I fully expect to see a scenario if he loses on election night to start calling about election integrity, fraud. It seems like the mantra of that Trump-style Republican is, if I win, it was fair. If I lose, it was fraud. And I think, we have assessed that and are sort of ready to glue him to that messaging. I don't know if you saw the Terry McAuliffe mailer that they put out, which was a Trump endorsement of Youngkin.
Yes, great piece.
Yeah, genius, right? So they get it, right? They've seen the polling, and now it's just a matter of bringing it home with some creativity and strategic spending.
Speaking of mailers in Virginia, I know you saw this. I was absolutely appalled that the Republican Party of Virginia, not some outside group, the actual Republican Party of Virginia, did a direct mail piece with a picture of a Jewish Democratic candidate hovering over a pile of gold with his hands out like claws. I mean, this wasn't even like the subtle kind of anti-Semitic trope. It was full bore. Has Youngkin denounced that yet? Has he said anything about it? Has he told the Virginia GOP to cut that shit out? Have you heard anything about that?
I have personally not heard about that. I will say that in Virginia, a lot of times the top of the ticket isn't necessarily the best leader when it comes to getting involved in state legislative elections, and can be pretty far removed from the caucus, especially when you have somebody who is a little bit of an outsider, is a Trumpian Republican and not sort of like the more traditional Republican. I have to say, I was shocked when I saw that mail piece when I woke up. I believe it was last Tuesday. And I can't believe that is happening anywhere in the world, but especially in Virginia and especially in Prince William County and Fairfax. These are, very educated places. Like we can do better. We should do better, right? And so when that happened, Commonwealth Ford, who is very supportive of Dan Homer, right? We want to see him reelected, but hasn't endorsed him in a formal sense, did reach out, and we helped him a little bit with a fundraising campaign, an email campaign. We'd really like to see him back in office. And you know what? I think that this, at the end of the day, is going to give voters a really clear choice about who they want leading them in that district. And hopefully this was able to shine some light on what the true colors of his opponent really are.
Right. I thought it was one of those things that deserved a little more attention and a little more focus. And it's I asked them the other day, like, how many real political reporters are left covering Virginia races? And it's really not that many anymore. Like everywhere else, the sort of local news business has collapsed. And so you don't get the intensity of coverage that in the old days would have ended up, that would have been a story for quite a period of time. And now it just seems like it's going to drift away, because social media attention spans are very, very short. So tell us a little bit more about Commonwealth Forwards. Like, what do you guys do on the ground? How do you motivate people? What are you out doing? You know, you're talking about 50,000 doors in 50 days. Talk to us a little bit about what Commonwealth Forward is doing on the ground.
Yeah, I would love to talk about that. And so at Commonwealth Ford, as a new organization, we really saw a need to fill a gap for candidates who are bold, who are standing up to corruption. Anybody who's worked in this political process, especially for campaigns, you know that it takes a lot to stand up to special interests on day one of your campaign, to say that I am foregoing any potential support that I might get over the course of my entire career by being anti-corruption and not taking corporate money. And so what are those folks giving up by making that decision? And how can we help them fill those gaps, right? So they're not choosing between David and Goliath anymore, right? They're choosing between like two very reliable and supportive bodies. And so we are trying to be sort of like the anti-corporate interest caucus. And so we help candidates from day one of their campaign, right? This is how you make a decision to run for office. This is how you file the paperwork. This is how you set up your committee and hire staff. We walk them through the whole process. And this is work that's done, you know, by a lot of different groups, but not necessarily for these radical candidates that we're looking at. And so once they run, we mentor them and we train them and we get their campaigns up and running, or help them get their campaigns up and running as much as they need it. You know, it's every campaign looks different. Definitely, you know, someone who's running for office for the very first time in a more local election is going to look different from somebody who's been elected 3 times over. And then when we get into this season of October, right, like the month right before the election, we're helping with door knocks. Sometimes we're helping with mail campaigns and digital campaigns, and really whatever it takes to see our candidates succeed, right? We want to be able to at least entertain the possibilities of helping them out. And so when we, every cycle is going to look different, right? This is our first cycle, but for 2021, we really saw a need to get on the ground and talk to voters. It's been kind of a strange couple of years with COVID across the country in terms of ground game, right? I think a lot of the trouble that we saw in the presidential election and you know, some of the surprising lags we had in some of the returns in Biden's election, there was a missed opportunity, I think, to get on the ground and talk to voters. And, you know, there are safety concerns, totally understand that. But this year, we really felt it was important to leave nothing on the table, especially for these first-time candidates, many of them, and these candidates who are so boldly anti-corruption. And so we partnered with several organizations across Virginia, several leaders across Virginia, and committed to knock 50,000 doors in 50 days. It's about 1,000 doors a day. Not always practically, because we're knocking a lot more on the weekends and so forth like that. But basically the idea is that together we are stronger, right? So who are the people who also believe in this mission, and how can we put sort of all of the skills that we bring to the table into one movement and do really great work for really great candidates.
Cool. Well, so let me ask you this question. The state of the race is close. It's tight, as we know from all the public and private polling we're hearing about. What do you think is going to be the big break point in every election has a moment about 10 to 12 days out where the chemistry kind of changes. We're getting really close to that day now. Right now, the election seems to be that Youngkin is trying to, you know, hide his Trumpism on the one hand, but embrace it on the other. Do you think Terry's got the chops to make that dichotomy evident? I mean, this is a guy that went on Seb Gorka's neo-Nazi radio show yesterday, you know, and said he was going to run the Trump agenda in Virginia. Is Terry converting quickly enough on these opportunities that Youngkin is giving him?
I hope so. And I also think that it's a delicate balance, right? I mean, we don't have to convince Virginia that Trump is bad for Virginia. Virginians have rejected Trump twice, in 16, in 20. And so I think that as much as we can bring that message home, which is really important, really relevant, we also have to remind Virginians that the traditional Republican agenda in Virginia has not served everyday Virginians. And so I think it's those two pieces together that I'm really hopeful are resonating with voters. This is probably one of the tightest gubernatorial elections that we've seen, definitely in Virginia, but also across the country in the past few cycles. And for anyone, the viewers who might not have seen the polling, it's really neck and neck, where I've seen some polls that are 48-48. I've seen some polls that have McAuliffe maybe at 50 or 51. But the consistency is that this is a 2-point race, and that the independent vote, which started out a much larger margin over the summer, is shrinking. A lot of those voters are going over to the Republican side, which McAuliffe should be concerned about, right? If he's losing independents. And the question is, where are those voters to gain? That's where the turnout game comes into play. He needs to turn out every Democrat in the state, or try to.
I think Kerry also needs to turn out, especially in Richmond and Southeast Virginia, the African-American vote in a way that reflects exactly who he is in terms of his long relationship with that community, and also the types of people that are around the Trump world, who, like you said, Youngkin goes on Seb Gorka's radio show, a guy who literally said in the state where Charlottesville happened that white supremacists just aren't the problem. And so I think it's important for him to also rev up those numbers down there in Southern Virginia, Southeast Virginia, particularly. We've got a spot that we've got called Trump or Virginia. I think it's in the stack, ready to roll. B, you want to pop that up?
November 3rd, 2020. Virginians overwhelmingly reject Donald Trump. November 2nd, 2021. Donald Trump is on the ballot again.
Well, I'm honored to receive the president's endorsement.
Glenn Youngkin was handpicked by Donald Trump as part of his plan to take over governor's offices before the next presidential election.
President Trump represents so much of why I'm running.
Like Donald Trump, Glenn Youngkin is against investigation into the January 6th insurrection.
I brought just a different view to this.
Like Donald Trump, Glenn Youngkin is against any requirements for COVID vaccination.
I want to talk about the real issues that are facing Virginians.
Even though he sends his own children to an out-of-state private school that requires vaccination.
Wanted to ask you about the decision without
Virginians rejected Donald Trump once. Why would we vote for him on November 2nd?
The Lincoln Project paid for and is responsible for the content of this advertising.
We are not known as a group with a lot of mercy or pity or softness. So here we go. It is going to be a hell of a fight in the last couple of weeks of this election, as I think you know, and many other folks are aware. Are you working with other groups out there in Virginia? Because what we found in our work is that it's important to build this sort of alliance of organizations and groups that have skill sets that we don't have. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we were approached by a group of Black ministers in Philadelphia during the course of the campaign. They said, listen, African-American turnout for Hillary here was down significantly. We can't get the Biden campaign on the phone. We can't get the DNC on the phone. And we said, show us your plan. They showed us a plan. And we said, where do we wire the money? And we ended up getting Black turnout in the Philadelphia suburbs up where it needed to be. Now, could we do that on our own? No, we're just not skilled in that department of doing turnout operations in the African-American community. But we're good at making friends. So I'm curious, are you guys out there working with other groups in Virginia to push this over the line? Or are you sort of riding solo?
Oh, no, absolutely. That is a core value that we have here at Commonwealth Ford. Look, the nation doesn't need another group reinventing the wheel and saying, we know how to win campaigns and nobody else does. And so our style is to look at those gaps and then really start looking local. We believe in leading with local, right? So if there are groups, if there are leaders already on the ground doing great work that aligns with our mission, we like to support them. And we like to give them some grease to their wheels to do the work that they're already doing. And that's really how 50 in 50 was born, right? We didn't need to reinvent the wheel of knocking doors in Hampton Roads. We needed to support the people who have been doing it there for years and years, primarily African Americans there. Right. That's a great example. And so that's definitely part of what we're doing. We're supporting about 5 or 6 door knocking campaigns across the state that all look totally different. Their models are different. They might be talking to different voters, but we believe that those are the right campaigns for those areas and for those candidates.
Right. Exactly. Well, you know, Kiera, I think that's one of the things, again, that we found is that you can never have a big enough network on your own these days in politics. You have to build a network of all these other networks so that it iterates out across, skill sets and across interests, which brings it down to the thing where we see what's emerging in the country is this, on the right, it's post-ideological and it's all about power. They don't care about any of the traditional things Republicans said they cared about in the past of limited government or personal freedom or any of that stuff. It's just about the exercise of raw power. And I think in the center of this country, there are a lot of people who've realized we don't have to all agree on every ideological point, but we sure have to agree that we're going to fight for democracy and fight to defend the American Republic and fight to defend the opportunity for everybody to have their voice heard in politics. So I know that's a lot of the work that you guys have been doing. And I really want to salute you for that. It was great having you on today. Can you throw us the ways we can get in contact if you're in Virginia, maybe volunteer with Commonwealth Forward, etc.
Yes, we would love to have you. We have 4 door knocking events left every weekend between now and the election. And we're also door knocking every day, but it'd be fun to come to a big rally for one of our great candidates and meet them in person. You can find us at commonwealthforward.com. And then you can find us on Twitter at Commonwealth Forward FWD. And thank you so much, Rick. I just want to reiterate that point. I saw some Twitter commenters who were surprised that you would have a progressive on your show, but I think it's so important that we recognize the value and the work that each other are doing. And can I just say that the work that the Lincoln Project is doing with that ad, I watched it yesterday, and I think that is how TV is supposed to be used, elections, right? It's emotive, it's provocative. And those are the kind of ads that hopefully are going to bring that message home with voters, independent voters, Democratic voters, and then, Trump voters too.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on today, Kiera, and we wish you all the best. Stay in touch, and we'll be following each other as we go forward into Virginia in the closing weeks of this big campaign. So thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, guys, I want to